Well, Thana, I'm glad you asked because I've been waiting for this. So first of all, let's look at the paper.
Another skeptic trying to debunk a miracle claim. Maybe this time we'll actually get somebody positing another explanation rather than a miracle happening, and then an explanation as to why the likelihood of that explanation, given the evidence, is higher than the explanation of a miracle happening given the evidence, rather than some of the typical appeals to hearsay, bias, and irrelevant things.
So this is a paper in question that says that someone with macular degeneration was cured from blindness through prayer. Let's look at a few key factors here. First of all, the study began in 1959 when she was diagnosed. We don't have any of these records from that time. Nothing in this paper shows any records of that time. We just have basically hearsay.
Rather than some bias, typical appeals to rather than some of the bias and appeals to hearsay, rather than some typical bias, hearsay, bias. Okay, great. Anytime you have a paper telling you what a source said, that's hearsay, and we shouldn't listen to what that paper says. That's, by the way, the majority of papers, because most papers have citations, and they'll tell you what the thing they're citing says. This isn't hearsay. Nonetheless, there's even worse problems with this video. Near the end of the video, he says this.
This is why I wanted to make a video and why I wanted to call it out, because if you just took the time to research, and I'm not saying you, Than, I'm not pointing you out and saying that you're doing this for nefarious reasons. What I'm saying is, in general, Christians tend to do this without doing all the research and looking at all the facts.
So why is that clip a problem for him? Well, because if he actually read the paper with an honest intent to look at the data and come to his own conclusion, rather than gold mining things that he thinks might be issues, he would see that they did provide medical examinations. He would have noticed and told you about a few things he didn't mention or maybe notice in the original video. First notice, he says,
the paper even says so right here. The case predates the availability of much of the ophthalmic testing now used for diagnosis.
They're not saying they don't have the medical records. They're just clearly and honestly outlining the difference in availability between the technology they had then versus now. Presumably, this might mean the chances of diagnosis are higher. The problem is, even if we grant a misdiagnosis, the only candidates for misdiagnosis are autosomal dominant retinal dystrophies, of which there's no cure for. Only treatments which can slow the progression of the disease exist. So even if she was misdiagnosed, the only candidates for this misdiagnosis are other diseases that still have no cure, and the treatment can only slow down the progression. Furthermore, if Mr. Friendly would have actually read the paper, we have this section here which explicitly states that they do in fact have the medical records, and they transcribe them for legibility. At the bottom of the paper, they have a supplementary report attached to the article. For example, they supply this original report from June 11th, 1960. Here's the transcription to make it easier. Here's a letter written by the doctor. Then we have this report outlining she is legally blind. Again, transcription for legibility. Then here's the medical record after the alleged healing, where you can see a report of 20/40 corrected vision, a 400% increase in visual acuity. There's much more, but the main point stands. There are medical records, and the paper did include them. What else does he have to say?
So basically, the incident happened in 1972 when she had her eyesight restored one magical night. But as you'll see, it took her 2 years to follow up with her prescription in 1974.
To begin, this report does in fact only mention a report 2 years later from the alleged healing. But Marilyn tells us herself in other places, for example her book, that she saw a doctor in September of 1972. So most likely the authors of the paper just did not have access to this documentation. And I have a phone call in the near future with Marilyn and the doctor she met with then. They are more than happy to actually provide some of the extra details for me, but because I don't have that right now, let's just say that she did in fact wait 2 years. What follows from that? I agree the ideal would be that she would have met somebody sooner if it wasn't only 2 years later, and that's because we want the medical review to be done as soon as possible. All that really follows from this is that there's a reported timeline of 2 years between the alleged healing and her medical review, and that something could have happened within those 2 years. Here's where the rubber meets the road. The logically and mutually exhaustive options on the table to explain the story of Marilyn are either that people were lying, people were mistaken, like a misdiagnosis, that there's some unknown natural cause at play, or some sort of divine intervention was at play. There are no other options. There might be a mix of some of those options put together, but broadly speaking, those are our 4 options. We have the medical records. This was going on from 1959 to 1972. Lying about being legally blind for 12 years would be really hard, not to mention again that the medical reports are consistent with her having this disease. And on top of that, again, after my recent call to her, she was very open, and the doctor was very open to giving me the medical documentation once we get on a meeting together. Definitely the sign of an old lady in her 70s trying to scam people into thinking a miracle happened. Did the doctors lie? Seeing as their names are not out in public and they're not gaining anything from this, I don't see any motivation for that. We've already covered why the misdiagnosis theory doesn't really help us at all here either. The candidates for misdiagnosis, again, still have no cure and only treatments that would slow down the progression of the disease. So maybe there's some unknown natural cause coming into play here, and that's what explained her remarkable healing. Well, that seems incredibly unlikely too, because whatever this unknown natural cause would be, would have to contradict everything we know about macular degeneration and eye health and the laws of nature and so on and so forth. So if we want to posit some unknown natural cause, that epistemically undercuts what we do know about science, natural laws, and this medical condition. And that's a huge price tag. Furthermore, if this was a good thing to do in theory comparison, then consistency demands that we should be able to do this everywhere. For example, maybe the person who believes in a global flood sees that we don't have evidence for the global flood. If you can posit some unknown natural law with no specificity to explain the miracle away, what's stopping the global flood believer from doing the same? The unknown natural cause theory also lacks specificity, so it doesn't actually even begin to try to explain the events that happened. You need to give a specific hypothesis as to what this unknown natural cause could be. Without the specifics, you can't match the likelihood of the event happening on the condition a divine intervention happened versus the event happening on the condition some unknown natural law or cause happened. Now the problem is, the more specific you get with this unknown natural cause, while you match the likelihood, now you're just transferring the improbability to the prior probability. So if you want to undercut a bunch of what we know about science and medicine and this condition, all in the name of avoiding a miracle claim, be my guest, but just be consistent with it. But I would argue that the considerations I've just given give us reasons for thinking the prior probability of some unknown natural law hypothesis to be extremely low. Let E equal Marilyn's healing, L equal the lying theory, M equaling a misdiagnosis, U for unknown natural cause, and D for divine intervention theory. For the reasons stated, I think the probability of E given L is very low, the probability of E given M is very low, and the probability of E given U is very low. That leaves us with the divine intervention hypothesis. Very modestly, it doesn't seem incredibly unlikely that if God exists, he would perform some sort of healing like this. He plausibly would choose to heal somebody like Marilyn to give us a sign that he does exist and that the gospel message is true. So, very modestly, the probability of E given D is not low. And I'm making this assessment really modestly without diving into excruciating detail on why, if God exists, he would choose to heal somebody like Marilyn, to show that I don't have to even demonstrate that the probability of this happening given God's existence is extraordinarily high. I just need to say that it's higher than the competing theories. Still, Mr. Friendly gives us other reasons to doubt.
And it wasn't even all the way. It was 20 out of 100 in each eye without correction. So that means that God didn't fully heal her, just kind of healed her. And in 2013, an eye exam records present a history that the patient had undergone cataract surgery in 2012 in both eyes. And that's when we see a significant improvement of 20/40 in each eye. Wait, God healed her, but she still needed cataract surgery?
A few things going on here. To begin with, the cataracts is irrelevant because this is a different diagnosis than macular degeneration. It's not related to the prior disease. Cataracts are pretty common in older people, and so for her to get cataracts in her old age is not really surprising. It doesn't tell us anything about her initial healing. Also, the cataract surgery, as he himself plainly states, happened in 2012, decades later after the alleged healing. As if when you're healed by God, you're not allowed to get sick ever again. But Mr. Friendly also points out that she wasn't healed to perfect vision. But this begs the question, does a healing have to be back to a perfect state, whatever that might be, to be actually considered a true healing? Do we have reasons for thinking God would only heal people to a perfect state? I don't think so. And this is also consistent with other healings of MD. For example, Greg Spencer's healing that I've talked about in the past has his eyes fixed to 20/30 instead of 20/20. And that's totally fine because before he got MD, his eyesight was 20/30. With correction, her eyesight was 20/40, which is very close to perfect. In fact, excluding her cataracts case, her eyesight apparently stayed at 20/40 for decades after. And typically what happens is when you get older, your eyesight starts to dwindle. For a woman's eyes to be 400% better in her 70s than compared to her 30s is quite remarkable, nonetheless. As far as I can tell, we don't know what Marilyn's eyesight was before her diagnosis, so this is just a moot point. I'm not even sure how this makes it less likely that a miracle occurred compared to the other theories. At best, this is just very, very, very weak evidence against a miracle hypothesis. Last but not least, Mr. Friendly says,
The biggest reason why I think this paper and this whole idea is just bunk is because right here, the authors thank Dave Harvey and Bethel Church of Redding, California for providing infrastructure, resources, and support to conduct this research. Who's funding this, by the way? Global Medical Research Institute. Who is that? Well, it's a nonprofit organization that applies rigorous research methods to investigate the effectiveness of Christian spiritual healing practices. So basically what you have is a biased paper that's trying to prove medical miracles.
This is probably the least probative point here. First of all, they're not hiding who's funding it. They're not hiding who they are and what they're researching for or anything like that. Second of all, everybody has bias. Pretending that you don't either means you're lying or you're just unaware of your own biases. Does that mean we should just disbelieve everyone when they post an argument? No? Or is it only when it goes against what we believe to be true? Furthermore, GMRI, through Candy Brown, published a book through Harvard University in 2012 called Testing Prayer. So in general, a lot of their stuff has been peer-reviewed and by top-tier universities. So yes, they specialize in investigating miracle accounts, and they want to try to demonstrate them. But that's irrelevant so long as they're clear and honest about the data, and they provide the evidence when available, which they've done in the supplementary material that this creator didn't cite or look at. Any judgments against whether or not this is a miracle case in virtue of some sort of bias that these people have is just irrelevant. That's fallacious reasoning. This is the same thing that people like Ken Ham do when he discounts the work of evolutionary biologists because they're godless heathens. This in no way, shape, or form should inform you as to whether or not a miracle happened with this case. Lastly, Mr. Friendly ends with this.
And why this is dangerous is because people will believe this and think they can be healed without actual medicine. And that's dangerous.
So I'm going to start with a point of agreement here. There are indeed Christians out there saying things like this. And I will stand alongside Mr. Friendly here in the condemnation of this belief, because it's a zealous and untrue belief that causes a lot of harm. That being said, I'm not really sure what this has to do with this case. Affirming that this is an actual miracle account doesn't entail that you have to believe that. The only thing that follows from affirming that a miracle happened is that miracles happen. I'm not here advocating for the belief that you shouldn't go to doctors, and I never have. And affirming that a miracle happened here doesn't entail that you should believe that either. So for the list of reasons here, I don't think Mr. Friendly's case against this miracle account actually work.